recording.
Oh.
Dr. Aruna, thank you for joining me on the podcast. I know you and I have connected here and there over the years, but I'm so happy that we finally get to have you on and have this
Thank
really
you.
important conversation.
Thank you, Nero. It is my absolute pleasure. It's lovely seeing you again and having this conversation.
I know it's great to see you. And this is, I really feel like this is an important conversation to have. And many of the experts I've had on in this season coming up have to do with challenging what we know so we can come to the right type of care for the individual. And basically saying, especially in the field of mental health and psychiatry, what we know isn't necessarily the end of the sentence. It is not the final word on treatment and prognosis. And what you have tapped into is this idea of holistic psychiatry. So we're going to talk about that. But also, you're very passionate about the fact that we need a shift in psychiatry as we know it. So can you say a little bit about that? What has gotten you to the point where you have felt this way and been so passionate about this shift that we need in this paradigm?
Thank you, Nero. That is actually a wonderful, wonderful question. And so, I have to share a little bit of my background. So I grew up in India, went to medical school, and also completed my psychiatric residency at a really good institute, the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, which is in Bangalore. And my education back there in India was, maybe cultural reasons, I don't know, but it was much more holistic. We paid attention to the diets and lifestyle and all of these things, even in the field of psychiatry.
Which makes sense. Which makes
Yes.
sense as integrative beings.
Yes, yeah. But when I first came here, and we need. I mean, I was reading the same textbooks that people, physicians or residents that in US and UK were having access to. But the interpretation of this information was so very different in my training back there. So with regard to the psychiatric medications, yes, we did use them, but we were very cautious about going up on the dosage or the polypharmacy and certain medications like benzodiazepines and opiate medications, which are so highly addictive. We did not use them as much. And the emphasis was more on the psychosocial rehabilitation. In fact, Indian psychiatry is actually credited with the concept of family psychotherapy and looking at the family, even for patients with schizophrenia. So this, and really the child psychiatry unit in NIMHANS is actually small apartments where not only the child, but the parents and siblings were also hospitalized.
So
for
interesting.
Yeah.
You never see that here.
We don't see that here.
Yeah.
And the other big difference is that the psych units are not locked wards. It's
They treat them like human beings, basically.
yes,
Right.
yeah.
Rather
And
than
I'll say
criminals.
this.
Yep.
There's this actually when NIMHANS was built, I think right before Indian independence from the British colonial rule, the architects of the building, they had this mission, and they actually say this, that the NIMHANS was supposed to be a place where people can be both mad and crazy, mad and safe. That was the whole vision that they had, that this was going to be a place where people struggling with mental illness were allowed to be quote unquote crazy, but they also needed to be safe. So coming from this kind of training and background, and I come here and I was shocked with the way the prescriptions were happening. 30-day supply for Vicodin, which is an opiate for headaches, and benzodiazepines given, so freely. And it seemed like that people were not really paying attention to the long-term effects of these medications. And also the big thing that I learned was that mental illness is a chemical imbalance. And we use these medications to treat it, but these medications don't really seem to do that great of a job, but we don't have any other options, so we're going to do what we have. That was the primary, belief system that I was taught, and I was participating in that belief system. But deep down, there was always this cognitive dissonance, which I was not even aware of, that if any of my family members needed any of these medications, I knew deep down that I wouldn't give it to them. Somehow,
that is so interesting that you say that, because
Yeah.
I have experienced a similar feeling, and not to say that I wouldn't give my children medication, and I've taken medication in my life and it has been helpful to me, so I will say that. But I also do many other things to move me in the direction of healing as I would for family members. It would not solely be dependent on that medication
Yes.
or that diagnosis for whatever that might be.
Yeah.
So I
So
understand
I
what
think
you're saying.
my cognitive dissonance probably came with the experience that I was actually having, is that people they're not really getting better. I mean, there was a sense that I was picking up, but in the busyness of residency, then starting a family and all of that, I didn't have the time to pay attention to this cognitive dissonance that I was having.
Mm.
That, hey, I mean, I'm giving these medications, they're coming back with side effects, their quality of life is going down, but I don't have anything else to offer. So this is what it's going to be.
Right, and for
But
people who don't know what cognitive dissonance is, it's that internal struggle from what we're
internal struggle, yes.
experiencing versus what we know to be true or feel to be true.
Yeah, where our intuition is telling us something, but the outside world is giving us a different kind of information,
Yep.
and we don't have the time or the energy to actually bring about a sort of a balance between these two things.
Mm,
But I think but after my children were born, when I was pregnant and going through, the childbirth and all of that, I became very, very interested in what I was feeding myself during pregnancy, what products I was using. And because this information was coming out about the toxins in the food system, in the water, and in our everyday products. And as I became more careful, like, I mean, my kids, they have not had any of the Coke products, or the soft drinks at all.
mm,
I know for the first 2 or 3 years of their lives, they did not even eat any food from outside. So
mm.
I was very careful about all of this. And when I was pregnant for the second time, I was working at the local hospital, and I would go hungry but not eat at the cafeteria, because I was like questioning whether it was organic, or what kind of processing has this food undergone. And then it came to me like, why? I mean, if I'm so careful about my own health and my children's health, how is this affecting the mental health of people? Because they are eating that food day in and day out. And then I'm also giving them these medications, many of which cause weight gain and, microbial disturbances and all that. It was out of all of this kind of, really that cognitive dissonance that made me seek out, okay, what is the connection between nutrition and mental health?
Mm.
And I began to see so much of information. Fish oil alone can actually reduce psychosis. It can actually prevent onset of psychosis in susceptible individuals.
Fish
Much
oil.
better. Fish oil, high dose fish oil.
What kind of
It's
dose
called,
are we talking about?
in this one, they gave, I think, 1200 milligrams of omega-3 fatty acids.
Mm,
This is called the Vienna study that was published, I want to say, probably in 2010 or somewhere around that time. I can find the reference and send it to you. And in this study, they took two groups of people that both of them had high risk of psychosis, meaning they had a first-degree
family
relative with
history.
family history of, like, first-degree relative with schizophrenia or other psychotic illness. And one group got 1200 milligrams of omega-3 fatty acids for about 3 months, so 12 weeks. The other group did not get anything. They were followed for 1 year and then 5 years later. And what they found is that the omega-3 group, they only got it for 12 weeks, but the benefit of taking fish oil prevented them from having psychosis, significantly prevented, not only at the end of 12 months, but at the end of 5 years.
Wow.
So this was, I mean, I was very, very excited when I saw this, and I started to recommend fish oil to everyone. But the hospital I was working at, they were like looking at it as, where is the evidence? And I would say, here is the evidence. Oh, this is just one study. But I mean, if any medication had this kind of an outcome, we
Yes.
would be jumping all over it. So, and then, that I remember in 2013, I came across this organization called ABIHM. It's the American Board of Integrative and Holistic Medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I went to this conference, and it was the most exhilarating, mind-blowing experience I had. In this conference, I was introduced to functional medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, which is traditional Indian medicine. And for the first time, I came away with a completely different paradigm, that gut is central to health or disease. All disease begins in the gut, and we need to pay attention to fixing the gut first. So when the presenters were really amazing in giving us real life examples from their own practice and showing how they went about, healing the gut, and this a lot of information I was exposed to, and I was just soaking it up like a sponge. And coming back from that conference, I decided to pursue Ayurvedic medicine and functional medicine. And I also did my diploma in integrative and holistic medicine. So came back with so much of information and actual step-by-step instructions as to how to implement it. And I started doing that in my practice at the hospital. But unfortunately, it wasn't well received. And that's what made me realize that if I really wanted to be, to offer something like this, I had to, completely make a clean break. And that's when I started my own practice in 2016. And
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So when you have a patient come in, and obviously they know that you're practicing from a holistic, integrative perspective. So say they come in with anxiety, how is the way that you treat them different than how a traditional psychiatrist in Western medicine would go about treating that patient?
So if you go to a traditional psychiatrist, so they will ask you about your experience of psychiatry, of anxiety, sorry.
Yes.
They'll, when does it happen? Is it interfering with your moods and your energy levels, motivation? How is it causing dysfunction? And describe, what situations, the triggers and mediating factors, all of that. Now, once this part of the evaluation is done, that's it. You come up with a diagnosis of anxiety. It could be generalized anxiety, OCD, social anxiety, whatever the case may be. And for all of these, you're given a prescription, typically for an antidepressant, because antidepressants are also considered medications to treat anxiety disorders. And you may receive a recommendation for a benzodiazepine for that as a rescue medication. And then if you're lucky, you'll be asked to meet with a therapist who can teach you many different skills to bring down your physiological arousal, challenge your negative thoughts, and then cope with the anxiety. But there is no question of why is this anxiety happening, right? There is no question of what led this person, both in the mind and in the body, to come to this point where they're experiencing this particular manifestation of illness.
Maybe not in the psychiatrist's office, but in the therapist office, yes.
How? In the sense of, psychological reasons, right?
Yeah. Yep. Situational, psychological, history, all of that, where it may have originated, but that takes time.
It takes time. It takes time. And your
psychiatrists
average
often don't have.
Well, I mean, we should be making the time.
Right.
Who's telling us not to have the time?
Right.
The insurance companies. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. But I agree. I mean, they may look at, okay, your childhood, you had some parenting problems with your parents, or maybe some bullying in school. And they may recognize that, but the direct line from these causative factors to the experience of anxiety is not really drawn. But the big piece that is missing is, how is this anxiety manifesting in the body? Now, if you start to ask this question, okay, where else do you feel? What is happening with your digestion? Do you feel hungry at regular intervals? Are you pooping regularly? What is the quality of your bowel movement? Do you have any pain in your belly? Now, when you ask all these things, you'll see that there's so much going wrong, especially in the gastrointestinal system. Then you look at, for us women, you look at your periods. I mean, how are your periods? What's happening around your menstrual period? What's happening around your ovulation cycle? Again, we can unearth wealth of information there. Immune system. Are you becoming sick more often? Like, are you catching every cold, every sniffle that's going on in your office or in your friend circle? And what about allergies? Are you having seasonal allergies? And what about food sensitivities? I mean, so many adults come to me, they didn't have allergies to, seafood or peanuts or other things when they were young children. But now all of a sudden, as adults, they're having all kinds of problems when they eat certain foods. How did this happen? And then when you ask these questions, and for me, I used to do what is called the functional medicine timeline. I would trace these symptoms back to when they first happened. Invariably goes back to childhood. starting always with imbalances in the digestive system.
Hmm.
And then, so really what is happening in my practice is that we trace the origin of symptoms both to its root cause in the body as well as to the root cause in the mind. And in doing it this way, in the body, I find that leaky gut is almost present in 99.99% of patients. That is the
Patients who are suffering from mental illness.
Yes, in my
Yeah.
practice.
Mhm.
I extrapolate it to everyone. I mean,
Mm.
if you're having any, I mean, this comes from both Ayurvedic medicine as well as in functional medicine, where all disease begins in the gut and it's in the form of leaky gut. So Ayurveda talked about all of this 5,000 years ago without microscopes, without, I don't know how they did it,
Right.
but with their intuition and, inner wisdom and, all of that. So they, but it's the same thing. So all disease begins in the gut with the process of inflammation through leaky gut, and there's a sequence of events that happens there. But when that inflammation begins to spill over into other tissues, when it reaches the brain, you see mental illness or neurological illnesses like migraines.
Mm.
And if it reaches your joints, you might see rheumatoid arthritis or lupus. If it reaches your kidneys, migraines can happen, multiple sclerosis. Now we are seeing that even Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's dementia actually have their origin in gut imbalance, like predating by 1 to 2 decades.
Wow.
So, and the good news about all of this is that once you know where the problem is, we can begin to, address that.
Mm-hmm.
Now that this was a physiological root cause, the beauty about the mind, the psychological root cause, and in my experience, I think majority of people suffering with psychiatric illnesses have trauma. Sometimes it could be just physiological trauma like head injuries, but it's most often psychological trauma.
Or emotional trauma, yeah.
Emotional trauma. And it doesn't have to be that, and again, I'm a parent, I feel that I've made some missteps and mistakes with my children. And it's not that we are blaming parents all the time. Sometimes, in the busyness of life, we are not able to attend to the emotional needs of our children.
Absolutely. Yep.
And when it happens too much, I mean, I think all we need to do is hit it 50% of the times as parents to get it right 50% of the times. But our patients who end up with different psychiatric illnesses have experienced less than optimal parenting experience in childhood. The modeling of emotional regulation, the development of an authentic sense of self, all of this gets sacrificed in their childhood, within their childhood experiences. But then what happens is that not only is it giving rise to a sense of self that is broken down and not integrated, but the same experience of this kind of subtle forms of psychological trauma actually leads through to formation of leaky gut, basically having holes in your gut lining. And that is
this because of the inflammation that's caused from being under the
yes,
chronic emotional stress?
yes,
In
cortisol.
Yes. Okay. So just a question to define the type of trauma, because people define trauma as big T trauma, little T trauma. When we're talking about this chronic, whether it's not being attended to, your emotional needs not being addressed, not necessarily something blaring, right? But just
Yes,
kind of a pervasive feeling that this child may have had through
yes,
childhood that has now contributed to how they see themselves, their relationship with the world, their sense of self-confidence,
yes,
those things. And then that stress, now you're correlating with this leaky gut because of the
yes,
cortisol. Okay.
yes,
All
yeah,
right.
yeah.
It makes
You put
sense to
that very,
me. Makes
yeah.
sense to me.
It makes sense to a lot of patients I work with. And again, it's very, I really want to make it very clear. It's not about, blaming anybody else.
Right.
It's just about understanding what are the
Why it
needs,
happened.
why it
Right. Why it
happens. Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then also we know that this kind of trauma, the subtle, the small T trauma, as you're calling it, that gets passed on from generation to generation. Because if you had parents that couldn't attend to your emotional needs, more than likely they themselves as children did not get those needs met. So they did not know how to then meet your needs.
Mm.
So this is some of the things that are happening. Um,
That's
and
interesting. That cycle is interesting, and it's very true. It's funny because I was talking to Ed, my husband, the other day, just about a family we know, and they're having a lot of relationship difficulties between a teenager and one of the parents. And I could see that happening, just knowing this parent. And I was telling Ed, we don't necessarily come into this world knowing how to be healthy parents. We have to do the work to learn how to do that because most of us have deficiencies in
Mhm.
how we understand parenting and what was shown to us, most of us. So
Yes,
unless we're willing to learn and do the reading and understand, we're not going to innately be equipped with that knowledge, not all of it that's
no,
needed.
no,
So, yeah,
yeah,
no, that's
and
or else
but
that cycle continues, sure.
that cycle continues, and what it requires is our awareness as the parenting generation. Self-awareness is very important, and really, what happens is that I think we go into the parenting business with wanting our ego needs to be met because they were not
Mm,
met earlier on. But really, the only ego that has a role to exist is the child's ego,
right.
in the parent child dynamic. But yeah, that gets lost in translation. I
Yeah.
think, from generation to generation. But yeah, I mean, for me, the fact that so many I mean, I'm sure you see this in your own practice, and I see this. There's a lot more awareness about this issue, that we need to raise ourselves first before we attempt to become parents ourselves.
Well, it's
And
interesting.
even, yeah,
Hmm.
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, continue that sentence. You said, and even.
So even if you are coming into it as a parent, like, for me, my awakening and awareness about all of these things happened with my children were already born.
Mm,
And like I said, I made some mistakes and missteps. But when I started to really take a hard look at my own, authenticity, my own sense of self, and how that was the lack of it, of my own authenticity, was interfering with me being a more effective parent to my children. I can definitely say that it's never too late to learn and make the changes that are needed.
that's an important statement, no matter
Yeah.
how old your kids are. Yeah, it's never too late
Yes.
because you continue to parent them as adults in
Yes.
different ways as well. So to learn how to
Yes.
be the support that they need. It was interesting. So we've talked with a family therapist a few times about different things we wanted help with in our family. And he said something so interesting. And he said, the child, whatever that issue is that presents with the child, actually reveals to us the unresolved issues that we have yet
Yes.
to
Yes.
deal with. And it was never so true as in the moment where he revealed that to us. I'm like, the only reason this is triggering to us is because we have work to do. The fact
Yes.
that we get triggered by it means that we
Yes.
have
Yeah.
some unresolved things that we have to take care of. And
Yes.
it's so true, and you're saying something along those lines similarly.
Yes. So the way I think of, the child development is that from birth to toddler age, attachment needs are very, very important.
Sure.
Having a primary caregiver that is consistent in providing attention and care to this developing baby. But the attachment needs really is more about physical survival. But once that, from toddler till about 7, 8, maybe even until 10 years of age, the need for authenticity becomes more important. So if the first 1.5 years of life was about physical survival, the next stage of life is about emotional survival.
Mm,
And this is where we get it wrong. So that, I actually don't even like the term terrible twos anymore. No, that child is going from their attachment needs being met, is now trying to figure out how to get their authenticity needs being met.
can you explain what that actually is, the authenticity needs? What does that mean?
So authenticity needs is wherein a child feels seen, heard, validated, accepted for who he or she may be.
Mm,
Whereas if you look at the dominant cultural paradigm when it comes to, parenting, especially the toddler age, is that we need to control their behavior.
right.
We don't allow for the child to explore the world, both the material world as well as the emotional world, on their own terms, make mistakes, and then we are not there to actually mirror emotional regulation.
Mm. And I think culturally that is more true in some other cultures that need to control and dominate behavior, but also a factor of our busyness, trying
Yes.
to get kids from one thing to another. I mean, looking
Yes.
at our kids are scheduled, but we cannot overschedule them more than we already do because we have 4. We cannot, but I look sometimes at only children and the activity to activity to activity to activity. So if this child has an emotional breakdown at some point, which they will, we don't have the time to address it in the way that we can because we have to get to the next thing. And
Yes.
that's even true of our family, and we've seen that.
Yeah.
So it's also a function, I think, of the way that we do life now in terms of
Yes.
kids and what
Yeah.
we think they need to become
Yeah.
successful as they get older.
Yes. I mean, that's why it takes a village to raise a child.
Sure
And
does.
yeah.
It sure does.
Yeah,
Uh,
and that slowing down is so necessary. Slowing down is so necessary. But really, authenticity is, oops, I'm so sorry about
no, it's
this.
okay.
Got to. Authenticity is really about being seen, heard, validated, and allowed to be who we are. And especially in girls, what we see, the ways it manifests is that the girl child becomes obedient, Miss Goody Two Shoes, does not find their voice until much later in adulthood when they're faced with a crisis where it's either you become authentic or you completely disintegrate.
You
This
lose
I see
yourself,
playing
right?
out in many of my adult women patients.
Yeah. In the context even of their marriages and relationships,
Any,
right?
yeah, adult relationships,
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it could be, I mean, in some ways it was definitely playing out with me. I think for me, when it manifested in my work realm. The more I was told that I couldn't practice holistic psychiatry, then the only, I mean, instead of I at that point in time, the only way I could express myself was with aggression.
Mm,
I mean, I'm going to quit everything and break up everything and then create my own thing. I don't need, any one of you. And, so now when I look back, I did not know how to be quietly authentic or simply be by myself. It really, there was so much of heartache and pain that went in this transition, which was really coming from a lack of authenticity on my own part. So it can manifest. It can manifest in work. It can manifest in your adult relationships. It can manifest in your relationships with your children as well.
right.
So in
So
every aspect, yeah.
it's interesting. I am having a gastroenterologist on. Actually, I'm interviewing her after you today, who
Hmm.
is going to talk more just about the leaky gut and that correlation. But if we ourselves are struggling with a mental illness, if we have someone we love, whether it's a child or a family member, how do you advise treating this? If if you're saying that just psychiatry as we know it is not enough.
Yeah. So I mean, look at all the things that we are talking about that goes into an adult or a child, for that matter, experiencing depression and anxiety, or even psychosis, for that matter.
Mhm.
So it's one is the psychological root cause, which is most often rooted in trauma or inauthenticity, in inability to be authentic self. And then physiological root cause, which is the leaky gut, which results in inflammation.
Mm,
Now, with all of this going on under the surface, you go to a traditional psychiatrist and they give you an antidepressant and an anxiety medication. That's not going to cut it. Maybe there is some symptomatic relief,
Relief,
but the medications themselves have so many side effects and
right?
dependency and all that stuff. So it's not going to help because you're not really addressing these root causes. So the first and
Saying it's
foremost,
going to perpetuate unless
it's going
we
to
get to the
perpetuate.
source of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not only going to perpetuate, and actually, unfortunately, antidepressants, especially, and even antipsychotics too, more and more studies are showing that long term use of these medications actually reduces our stress resilience.
Mm,
It actually makes it more likely that we experience more depression episodes when you take an antidepressant for a long period of time.
mm,
So it's changing our neurochemistry not for the good. So that's something that we need to talk about. But at the very minimum, what it is doing is that it's trying to suppress the symptoms without addressing any of these root causes. So
mm,
inflammation, gut inflammation. So you're speaking with this gastroenterologist, so that's going to be really awesome. Leaky gut has to be treated because otherwise this leaky gut becomes the portal for inflammation. that is constantly happening. And then, so in my practice, I tell everyone, first heal the body to heal the mind. Because, and that's the other thing, when somebody's got all this inflammation, which will lead to emotional dysregulation, that, that highs and lows that happen is directly linked to leaky gut and inflammation that's coming from the gut. When that is happening, try getting them to practice mindfulness. It's not going to be possible. I mean, they may do it, but it's going to be so much easier when their gut is healed or their inflammation is reduced, and then you get them to reflect, become self-aware, practice meditation and mindfulness. It'll stick like that.
Do you feel this is true of kids acting out as well?
Oh,
Kids
yeah.
who have high-low emotional behavior, that there is
Yes.
something in that we can affect change by addressing their diet and what's going on in the gut?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the first point of intervention, is healing the leaky gut through diet and specific foods. So bone broth and clarified butter are very, very essential, along with high dose fish oil. So I've had a kid who was 10 years old when I worked with him. He had severe anxiety for about 2 years. It started off with a random incident where his younger brother, who was about 2 years younger than this patient, was playing somewhere in the school, and him and the mom couldn't find him. So he thought that his younger brother was missing. And from then on, that anxiety took root, where he thought his mom was going to go missing or his brother was going to go missing. But he was so anxious, he couldn't even sleep through the night. Like literally every couple of hours he would wake up. And this was going on for 2 years. Parents were not keen on medication, so they tried therapy, wasn't really making much of a change. And they came to me, and I told them all the things that they needed to do, which can get a little overwhelming when you come to it without any prior knowledge. But the one thing they did was gave him high dose fish oil. And within 1 week, the dad calls me and says, even if you don't do anything else for us, I am sold. He's sleeping like a baby that he hasn't done in 2 years.
Wow. And high dose for kids, again, 1,200 milligrams or less?
No. Actually, 3,000 milligrams of EPA. So fish oil has 2 components, EPA, which is eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA. Studies have actually shown that EPA of 3,000 milligrams and more is calming to the nervous system and is also healing to the gut.
And that would be the case for kids and adults? 3,000. So
3,000.
regardless of if they're 10 or 50, it'd be
Yes.
3,000 a day. And you put them on that indefinitely, long term?
For about 6 months at least.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So the way to think of it is that whether it's a physical disease or a mental disease that is manifesting, cells, tissues, and organs are all diseased. And what we need to do in treatment is to kickstart the repair and regeneration process. And as long as we still remain humans and not cyborgs, the only thing that will repair and regenerate our cells and tissues and organs is food. Nothing else. It's only food.
Interesting. So interesting. Now, do you have, so you said leaky gut food, and you specifically said bone broth, clarified butter, fish oil. These are things that can assist in repairing leaky gut. Are there other things that you could recommend that people can do for leaky gut?
First thing is elimination diet. So we eliminate dairy, gluten, corn, soy, eggs. And I also recommend that they don't eat salads or uncooked meats or raw food. They can have it as smoothies, but not salads. Raw fruits can be eaten raw. And the reason for that is because whenever we see leaky gut, it means that you're not making digestive enzymes. So your ability to digest your food is going to come down, which, in children, it shows up as they'll always complain of stomach pains.
Yes.
But it'll also show up as pickiness in eating.
Okay.
And the pickiness is because their digestive abilities have gone down. So it's not that this kid is, just trying to make your life miserable. I've seen so many times where children, once we improve their digestion, they'll start eating foods that they didn't like before.
Wow. So you
So
do that for how long? The
the
elimination?
elimination diet I recommend for, depending on the underlying condition, at least for 6 weeks.
Mhm.
And during the time that they're on this elimination diet, it's very important to consume bone broth and clarified butter.
Mhm. Every day.
These two, every day. Yeah, every day.
Is there a certain quantity that you recommend of bone broth or
Bone
clarified butter?
broth, at least a cup, 8 to 10 ounce. It could be made of chicken bones, lamb, beef. These are the top ingredients. So we are, and people sometimes like to use collagen powders. I want people to know that the more natural a food is,
Mhm.
the better it is going to be for our recovery. I
Mm.
mean, if you cannot find bone broth, you cannot make it, collagen powders, yes, you can have it. But when you make your own bone broth, or at least buy, bone broth that is intact and made from bones, you're not only getting the collagen, which is a very important ingredient for repair of the gut lining, but you're also getting the fat soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. You're getting some calcium. You're getting so many other minerals and nutrients that are very essential for us. And I also, so clarified butter, at least 2 tablespoons every day.
Mhm.
And that will not actually make you put on weight. Fat, good quality fat, even saturated fat, will not make us put on weight.
Mm.
But it'll actually normalize your immune system. It'll balance your gut. It'll balance your hormonal system.
So fascinating to me. And true, and it just so happened coincidentally, all the experts I have on in this season have a similar message in terms of healing and gut and just
Yeah,
rethinking the way that we do things. So
yeah.
at some point after the elimination diet, you start adding these foods back?
Yeah,
Yes.
we do. But see, it's not only the elimination diet, but we also have to restore the digestive abilities. That will require certain herbs,
Mhm.
which comes from the from Ayurvedic medicine. So
Mm.
that depends. There are herbs where we reduce the inflammation in the body while enhancing the digestive abilities. A very simple tea that I recommend is cumin, coriander, and fennel tea. It's called the CCF tea.
Mhm.
And this is really good to restore your digestive fire without throwing you into acid reflux.
Mm.
Whereas I know sometimes in functional medicine, people do recommend use of digestive enzymes, but in my experience, I've seen that giving a digestive enzymes in people that are already inflamed makes them actually go into acid reflux. So
Mm.
it's a little counterproductive. But CCFT, and there are many herbal formulations in Ayurveda that specifically address these situations. And again, depending on the presentation of a given patient, we may use one or the other. But the things I'm sharing with you are anybody can do it. And all of this goes hand in hand. So the fish oil, I do also recommend a multivitamin with methylated B vitamins,
Mhm.
and vitamin D for sure. Everyone is deficient in vitamin D.
Mhm.
And then the CCFT is part of our core protocol, and whatever herbs that are indicated for a given patient. So we use all of this. And in fact, I point out to the patients that I'm not really giving them any brain specific herbs or supplements. I'm really just focused on healing this.
Mhm.
And simply by changing the diet, people experience 30% improvement in symptoms, both physical and mental.
Mhm.
Or if they only start with the herbs, they'll see a 30% improvement in symptoms. But
Wow.
when they combine the two, and improvement happens within 3 weeks,
Mhm.
2 to 3 weeks.
Do you use any pharmacological medications in treating of mental illness?
For majority of my patients, no. Like if they're not on any psychiatric medications, I've not found a reason to start them on that.
Okay.
Except patients with psychosis,
Mhm.
people with schizophrenia. But I mean, even there, I had a patient who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she had been hospitalized once in New York, once here in Wisconsin. And every time she went on the medication, she was told that she would be on this for the rest of her life. And for 7 years, she had this kind of an experience, but she didn't want to be on medication because it made her put on a lot of weight. So one more time, she had gone on the medication, experienced improvement in symptoms. And then as soon as she got better, she went off of them. For about 3 months, she was better, then began to have the symptoms again. And she found me at about that time because she didn't want to go back down the same route. This was in April of 2020.
Mm.
And so, yeah, she was delusional. She was hearing voices. She also had very bad OCD. But
Mm.
what really struck me was a severe rosacea she had on her face.
Mm.
To a traditional psychiatrist, they were not making the connection. So that severe rosacea told me that she was highly inflamed, and it was that inflammation that was making her have her mental illness symptoms. So is it really schizophrenia? Or is it just inflammation? So in her case, she absolutely refused to take any psychiatric medications, but she was completely compliant with everything I asked her to do. In 6 weeks' time, her delusions and hallucinations disappeared.
Wow.
And her rosacea began to, I mean, I've written a blog. There are pictures of her before and after, the rosacea improving. And then as part of our blood work that I do, I found that she actually had Hashimoto's disease, which is an autoimmune thyroid problem. And so really her case, if you were to be technical about this, we should call her as having Hashimoto's psychosis. There are some case
Right.
reports about this. But my point is, if you're not looking for it, you're not going to
You're
find
not going to see it. Yeah. That's so interesting. Okay, I have one more question for you because we are running out of time. But first of all, I mean, where can people connect with you?
So the phone number is 262-955-6600. Trinergyhealth.com is our website. So there's a chat function. And I'm in Wisconsin, but I do see patients outside of the state as well.
Virtually.
Virtually,
Okay.
yes. Yeah. So
I
we
will
try.
list all your info on the show notes so people can connect with you and look at your blog and learn more
Yeah,
about you. But you're working on a book.
I
Is it
am.
finished? Is
Yeah.
it coming out? When is it coming out?
So I have done, I mean, I've written the book. It's organized, and it's got, I think, about 15 chapters. I'm looking for a publisher. So
Okay. And
that's where, and
tell us
with
about
us.
this book.
So this book, everything that we are talking today, I've actually shared it in the book, my evolution from being a traditional psychiatrist to a holistic psychiatrist. And I've gone into detail about the science behind leaky gut and inflammation as one of the leading hypotheses for any mental illness and what we can do about it. So my standard protocols, I mean, obviously I cannot recommend herbal supplements because that's more individualized. But majority of the people, like I said, by changing their diet and healing their inflammation with some things that anyone can do, people will still find significant improvement in their symptoms. And then after that, if they are able to find somebody who's trained in more holistic approaches, they'll be able to find complete recovery and healing for themselves.
It's
So
such an important message, and I have no doubt that you're going to find a publisher soon because
thank you.
this is information that needs to get out, and for people to just know what their options are, right? To be able to look
Yes.
at all of their options, not just one, and make the right decision for themselves. And I think this information has been really helpful, and I already saw things that I thought we need to do this in our family, even preventatively, right? We need to do some of these things in our family. So thank you for your time. Thank you for having this conversation. I would love to have you back at some
Thank
point.
you.
There are more that we could talk about, but I think this gives us a really good start and overview of why you're so passionate about what you're doing
Yes.
and the results that you're seeing from it. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Nero. It's been my pleasure.